بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Really appreciate you guys all joining on time and making space for this on your busy schedules this Sunday ahead of the best 10 days of the year. So I want to share something with you that I've probably only shared with a few people in the last few years. It was Hajj 2018. That was my first time going to Hajj. And we had, alhamdulillah, completed the rites of Hajj. And we were now on our way back. We stopped for a few days in Medina. And I was able to go to Fajr Salah on one of those mornings, alhamdulillah, and I sat next to a stranger before Salat al-Fajr. As, often happens in this place, so many people from different parts of the world. Said salam to the brother. And then within a few minutes, I realized, or we both realized, we were both from the United States. And the brother was actually from Dallas area. He had come for Hajj with the Qalam group. And our conversation led to a point where he invited me to a gathering that evening. He said that, their shuyukh were going to be having this gathering that he would love for me to join them, inshallah. So I said, sure. And I almost didn't go. A few minutes before, it was time for me to head out in that direction after Maghrib Salah, the brother sent me a message that he was not going to be able to make it. And so I was like, if he's not there, what's my business in that room? But he encouraged me to go. And so, alhamdulillah, I was able to make it. The room was full. The spread, the buffet, as they do, was very rich. But what was even more pertinent was just the atmosphere. There was so much energy from people who had completed Hajj, maybe for the first time, maybe, like myself, or many, many times in the past. And one of the shuyukh, he led a reflection that we had an incredible opportunity here. If our Hajj is accepted, we go back as if we had never sinned before. And as if that wasn't good enough, he said, more than that is the opportunity to change our perspective on life. And that's truly what transforms a person when they go for Hajj. Is that their mindset starts to shift towards their success, not only in this life, but more importantly, in the Akhirah. And then he recited Surah Al-Fatiha, from the beginning of the surah, and he got to Ihdina Sirat al-Mustaqim. We recite this every day, multiple times a day. Oh Allah, guide us to the straight path. And then what follows, Sirat al-Ladina an'amta alayhim, the path of those whom you have guided and blessed. غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين, not the path of those who you have misguided or who are completely gone astray. And he paused. And he said, what will truly help us to identify or understand the difference between these two categories, those who are guided versus those who are not, is one of the questions that will become pertinent on the day of judgment. The day that it matters the most. And the question is, what did we invest our lives in? And then the question that I asked myself that day, and then I pose to you all today is, you know, am I spending most of my time investing in the akhirah, or am I spending most of it investing in the dunya? And in the sight of Allah, those two couldn't be farther apart in their relevance. So I was scared. Um, I was scared because, alhamdulillah, I was just a few years out of residency and fellowship, and I was already a physician leader. I was leading people who were maybe 1 or 2 years behind me to people who were 20 years ahead of me in the profession within just a couple of years of finishing training. Alhamdulillah. And so, by professional standards, alhamdulillah, at that time things were going really well. But then, when I thought about the ledger of my life, the account that I'm investing in, that question really hit me hard. Is, am I truly investing in my eternal future? Am I investing at the same rate or even a little bit more than I was currently doing at that time? And the answer was obvious, because that's where the fear was coming from. Is that I wasn't really prioritizing my akhirah. Um, and so what I'm inviting you guys to today is that kind of perspective, to shift that perspective. Because to shift that perspective is to become a spiritual intelligent healthcare worker and leader. Not because you stop investing in this life, but because your investment in your healthcare work, in your profession, your journey becomes something more meaningful. It becomes worship. It becomes tied to your akhirah. And that's why we're having this conversation today. Because just like me back then in Hajj, the opportunity to shift perspective, only comes a couple of times a year. We have that opportunity truly every day, but when it's really more tangible or most tangible, oftentimes, especially in Ramadan, and maybe to some degree, increase in awareness, it's also in these best 10 days of the year. Somebody's trying to join. Welcome, Dr. Zia. And that's what I'm inviting you all to today, is to truly realign your work and your life in these best 10 days of the year. And as we have those conversations today, the rest of the conversation, it's really about finding that alignment, not losing the dunya, taking our portion from the dunya, but recognizing that the ultimate investment is the investment in the akhirah. And I'll invite you to a conscious Bismillah. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, in the name of Allah, the most beneficial, the most merciful. Because in this essence of this ayah, this phrase that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has gifted to us, is an opportunity to attract barakah into this session, is to renew our intentions and to truly commit to a path of realigning ourselves, our desires, with what is pleasing to Allah. And I'll invite you to listen to a recitation of Surah Al-Duha by Dr. Abdullah Haikal, who's a radiology resident in one of the programs in the United States.
والضحى والليل إذا سجى ما ودعك ربك وما قلى وللآخرة خير لك من الأولى ولسوف يعطيك ربك فترضى ألم يجدك يتيما فآوى ووجدك ضالا فهدى ووجدك عائلا فأغنى فأما اليتيم فلا تقهر وأما السائل فلا تنهر وأما بنعمة ربك فحدث.
Sultan reward Dr. Hakel, and this surah was revealed to Rasul during a time of struggle. A tension that we often feel in healthcare is this tension between our healthcare identity, the pursuit of professional excellence, versus our spiritual identity and to do what is pleasing to Allah. And that tension is not a sign of weakness. It's not even a sign of failure or that our iman is not strong. Rather, it's a clear indication that the system that we all work in healthcare, were not designed to simultaneously hold a strong professional identity and a strong spiritual identity, except for very few people who have been able to, alhamdulillah, push the boundaries and find their place. And it has come with, more struggles as well, or different type of struggle. And so the idea of a spiritual intelligent healthcare worker is to be able to recognize that tension, but not just to leave it there. Because the tension will always exist until we answer this question to ourselves. What are we going to do about it? In the Asbab al-Nuzul, the reasons for revelation of this surah, Rasul fell very ill. And then a lady, she stepped up to him and said that your evil has finally left you among the Quraysh, the disbelievers. And then Allah revealed this surah to reassure him that you have not been forsaken. And it applies to all of us. Not only did Allah reassure him that he has not been forsaken, Allah highlighted very clearly that he was going to take care of him and that he will become from amongst those who are successful. And that reassurance is coming from his tawakkul in Allah, conviction in Allah, his certainty that choosing Allah over and above all else, to cultivate a faith-first identity, will only bring more barakah into our lives and more meaning into our work in healthcare. So our intention today is to just create this space to realign. It's not to learn to share more information necessarily, and to hone in on this idea of spiritual intelligence in healthcare. Because that alignment is essential for us to become our best selves in our work and not compromise our souls and our akhirah. And then we'll see from the life of Prophet Ibrahim والسلام, who we honor, especially in these best 10 days, in the days of Hajj, that spiritual intelligence comes through the acts of submission and sacrifice. And then we'll look at some practical tools that will help us to align, inshallah. And for those of you who are not familiar with our work, just like you guys, I'm deeply rooted in the healthcare space, board certified in clinical informatics and family medicine, and a master's in health informatics. And I've been doing some work at the intersection of faith, resilience, and leadership through certifications with the Productive Muslim Company, and then working on my coaching certification with the Baraka Hub and the Resilience Institute. My own journey of trying to work through this tension between, a strong professional healthcare professional identity and a faith first identity is what led me to found this company, Sakina Growth Company. It's my reality. I was just at a conference a couple of days ago, and that tension existed. But we have to continue to work through it. We have to be intentional about it because our akhirah is what is at stake. It's just too important to let it happen by default. So, oftentimes in our work, we're doing everything right, but something still feels off. We're always catching up. We, you know, our charts are struggling to complete them. The meetings, we're always racing to get into them. The patient care, everything always seems to be on an urgency. And then the rest of life takes a backseat. When we're lucky to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's often mood dependent. Our Quran, our time for Salah. And then sometimes we don't even have any energy left to do those things. And then we have the struggle that comes with depleted energy that our family is getting the leftovers. We come back, we're exhausted, and the slightest thing sets us off. And then our self-care, of course, already has taken the back seat. And then work expands everywhere. From the evenings, the weekends, it just completely takes over. And then we're wondering, because this is where most of our energy is going, we're very successful in that regard. But the rest of life just has a sense of imbalance to it. If you can identify with any of these, and most likely all of us can identify with one or two, if not more of these, at certain different seasons in our lives. And that's why the idea of a spiritually intelligent healthcare worker and leader is so important, because it gives us the tools, the mindsets, the values, the behaviors, the intentionality around finding a way to balance all of this and to be able to thrive at work and in life without compromising either one. And more importantly, investing in the akhirah at the same time. And here are four, colleagues that you may be able to relate to, even on a deeper level. You have an overextended healer, the yes man. Usually, in the first few years after residency, maybe that's how I ended up in leadership, is just saying yes to everything. And I was struggling to take care of myself. But there was a strong desire, to create boundaries, to invest in self-care. And then in that moment in Masjid Nabawi, when I met that stranger who invited me to that gathering, that really changed my perspective. I was likely more like the spiritually hungry achiever. Alhamdulillah, work was going well. But my salah, my dhikr, those things they were not consistent. Alhamdulillah, I was able to go for Hajj even in those moments. But there was this clear struggle. And then anyone who has kids has probably felt that cramped guilt because you're working in healthcare. Uh, it's expanding, work is expanding into every space, and you're just not able to be fully present with your loved ones. There's always that pager, that call, that chart, that patient need or a system need. And then when you're trying to do something about it because you don't have much energy, the system has its own pressures, you become the exhausted advocate. And in its worst form, you're completely burnt out, or you're experiencing moral injury and moral distress. If you can relate to any of these, I want you to just type it in the chat box, which one feels most familiar, or you can just drop the number, you know, one for the overextended healer, two for the spiritually hungry achiever, in that order, three, and then four. All at some point. That's me as well. Jazakallah khair for sharing. Maybe a quarter, not 100% of any. Yeah, that's the ER doctor perspective, inshallah. Two. Yeah, that was me and Medina for sure. One. Yeah. At some point in our careers, we all go through that phase where we're saying yes to everything. Um, and we completely put our own needs aside, thinking that that actually is what will get us ahead. Now, let me make it easy for all of us. So, what is missing when we're experiencing these four different stations? It's barakah. Imam Raghib al-Asfahani, an 11th century scholar, he defined barakah as the attachment of divine goodness to a thing, and something that the Rasul Sallallahu made dua for, that Allah should grant barakah to the ummah in their early hours, specifically. And then we also have narrations about Musa alayhi salam also making a similar dua, that Allah should make us mubarak wherever we may find ourselves. Imagine that you are a spiritually intelligent healthcare worker or leader, and that you keep asking Allah for barakah, and that the workplace is transforming because not only that you're making dua, but that you're intentionally taking the means, tying your account, being intentional about how you interact with people, how you serve others, and keeping the akhirah in perspective in all of this. And Muhammad Faris, when he explained this concept of barakah, he said that not only does it increase that thing that this divine goodness is attached to, or make it more stable or more long lasting, but most importantly is that it brings us back to Allah. It brings us back to alignment with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's will. And that's why, when we think about healthcare work, the tension of our spiritual identity and our healthcare identity, and the workload, and our relationships, our families, our own self-care. Because barakah causes increase, causes stability, causes continuity. It's something that we want to intentionally uh, work towards, because it can really set us up for success, not only in this life, because of the expansion in time, in our capacity, and in all the resources that are at our disposal, but more importantly, because it brings us back to alignment with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's will, and that everything that we're doing then becomes an investment in our akhirah. and that we're not choosing one over the other, but that there is that true alignment. And when we look at the example of Rasul Sassan, this was his example, that when he was dealing with people, he dealt with them with ihsan. He gave them full attention and presence, not the often hurried ways that we approach, our work these days because of these external pressures. And then when he had to lead and govern the community, he would make mashura. He would do consultation with his companions, the closest to him, the ones who had unique perspective in the issue at hand, to unite their hearts and also to be able to get to the best approach, to do a lot of consultative medicine, curbside consults. That should not come from a place of ego, rather it should come from a place of service. And so alignment is key to be able to attract barakah and to be able to thrive in work and in life without losing our akhirah. And for us in healthcare, the reality is there's a lot of misalignment. And the misalignment is driven by the system because the workload is intense and we don't, as we've identified already, we don't invest enough in self-care. And so our energy levels are low, intentionality also takes a hit. And then in the worst case scenario, we end up burnt out, moral distress, moral injury. But where we want to get to is that barakah paradigm, where we can continue to thrive at work and put our best foot at work, but that we have high alignment and that we're cultivating the four gardens, the four dimensions of our lives, from our deen to our relationships, especially our closest relationships, to the care of ourselves and our optimizing our energy levels, and that all that kind of feeding into us showing up with our best selves at work. And then we can be in this place of sustainable excellence. And this is how we, inshallah, become more spiritually intelligent in our work, in our leadership, and in our lives. So what happens when barakah doesn't exist? I want you to pay attention to two main quadrants here. We have this gap model that shows our performance, the y-axis, and then our alignment on the x-axis. And in the top left quadrant, where we find ourselves quietly burnt out, we're often doing really well on the outside by most of the metrics at work. And we almost don't realize that we're sacrificing our souls, our akhirah, while doing all of this. And that's the worst place to be, because patients don't see it, or they see that something's going on, but they don't know what it is. Our families also notice, but they may not be able to actually specifically name it. Sometimes we even miss it. But the goal is to get to that place of barakah excellence, where there's high performance, the high performance at work and in life, and there's high alignment with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's will. And what that looks like is your day, your calendar truly reflects your commitment to investing in the akhirah, and not just this life. So when we wake up in the morning, for example, we acknowledge Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's grace and mercy for letting us get up from this minor death. We make space in this first few hours of the day to truly focus on nurturing ourselves, nurturing our souls. We spend time with the Quran, make sure that our salah is taken care of. You build in time in the course of your week for movement, to work out, things that nourish your body and fulfill the trust of taking care of your body. And then, of course, you show up at work. You know, you follow the sunnah of smiling. You do your best in your service, not because there's going to be a malpractice lawsuit if you make a mistake, but because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching, and that you make the niyyah that we're doing our best to serve humanity in a way that is pleasing to Allah, and that there's an intentionality behind that. And while we will never get to the level of Rasul Sallallahu, we have to aspire to it. We have to work towards that place of Baraka excellence. And in between those two, the quiet burnout and the Baraka excellence is a survival mode, where the person is a low performer, they're in low alignment, things are just not working out, they're just showing up. And some of us go through that phase. And this work of intentionally cultivating Baraka is also for you if you're in that space. Or there is the sincere seeker who is, mashallah, doing their best to align, setting the intentions, but they may be spiritually bypassing, meaning that there's an intense focus on the spiritual side of things and they're not necessarily tying their camel, maybe not investing in their education, or there's factors in the system that's keeping them a low performer. Maybe it's a toxic environment and they're not doing anything about it. And that's also another really bad place to be. And so our North Star is alignment with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's will. And part of how we get there is through Baraka excellence. And to get to Baraka excellence is to go back to where we started, which is spiritual intelligence. When we look at our evolving intelligence, clinical intelligence is what gets us through the door. The skills, the metrics, the board certifications, all those things are CME, but it's never enough. Because once you start talking to enough, patients, you quickly realize that you have to also master the art of communicating with them to build rapport. Because patients only do, what somebody that they truly trust and connect with tells them to do. And that's where emotional intelligence comes in. And that's especially relevant in leadership, because leadership is influence. It's where you work with others to achieve a common goal. But if we keep things at the level of just emotional intelligence and clinical intelligence, inshallah, you'll have a lot of success in a dunya perspective. But then perhaps you may not be as intentional in aligning all that you're doing at work with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's will. You may not be necessarily take care of that patient because it's a true amana, that you're fulfilling the haqq, fulfilling the trust of that care. And then fulfilling the haqq of all the other guardians in your own life, so that you can be able to show up at your best. So your deen, your self-care, your relationships. And then doing the work with ihsan. Not because, again, they're malpractice lawsuits, but because Allah, we worship Allah, we do our best to worship Allah, even if we can't see Him, as though we know that He sees us. And at the highest level, it's the station of ikhlas, where we're approaching work with sincerity. That sincerity of seeking purely Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's pleasure as we do this work. And then we can start to experience that spiritual intelligence in healthcare. The work has more meaning, there's more contentment. We start to then attract barakah. We start to earn Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's tawfiq, His divine capacity, to be able to do more with less. And we're able to intentionally integrate spiritual intelligence into our work and our lives. And there's this spiritual intelligence equation that I always share with clients. It's become a really important frame of reference for myself and for many others. And this is adapted from the work of Muhammad Faris at the Productive Muslim Company. And the premise of this equation is that Allah has gifted us three main areas where we can put in our effort. The first effort, or the first component of our effort, is that we all have a free will. We have that free will to choose, to set intentions, to think, to plan, to make decisions. Am I going to choose Allah, or am I going to choose my desires? And then there's the component of the natural law, which is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created a cause and effect world. We can learn about the world that He created. One natural law is that if I want to become a physician, I have to go to medical school. There's no amount of dua I make without going to medical school that will get me there. And that's a cheesy example, but it's pretty obvious. Because sometimes we want something and we're making dua, but we're not really doing anything about it. And so when that moment when I was in Medina in that gathering, when the Sheikh shared that we have a true opportunity to shift our perspective and to choose to invest in our akhirah in a way that's different than maybe we had done before we went for Hajj. That there are some natural laws to be able to do that. While we were able to set the intentions there in that moment where we had experienced that shift, the work we made, that's what led me on this path of exploring the work of Muhammad Faris, because he really focused on Muslim professionals and all the other resources out there that have supported my own journey. And so we all have that capacity to choose what we're going to invest in. The healthcare system is designed so that we're going to invest in CME whether we like it or not. Our license depends on it. But the one that always feels abstract and there's no real pressure to shift, the discomfort doesn't really hit home, is that there's this life, this eternal life that I also have to work towards. And that I need to take specific action, whether it's leaning on an accountability partner, a mentor, a coach, some cadence that I can invest in on my own. And then there's, of course, Allah's permission, seeking divine permission. That when we want to do something, there's no amount of work that we put in the free will and the natural laws component. It will only happen if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wills it. And so we have to ask Allah for permission. We have to make dua. We have to have the mindset of tawakkul. Maybe I want to own my own practice. It takes a lot of courage. But more important than courage is tawakkul. That we trust in Allah. As long as we're tying our camel and we're taking those steps, that Allah will help us to get there. And that we leverage things tied to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's permission, like the example that the Rasul gave us in doing consultation, asking people who know to help us as we're making the decision. And that altogether brings alignment and attracts barakah. And then on the other side of the equation is the outcome. This is the tricky part. Because we're trained in medical school, in residency, and the different avenues to always be people who focus on a specific outcome. Much of the literature out there is focused on outcomes. There's very few, maybe, papers that focus on the process. The process is these first three components. The outcome is the end result. It's obvious that the outcome is not really in our hands, but we forget that. There's a saying that it's easy to believe Allah, but sometimes we struggle to believe in Allah. Because the reality is, it doesn't follow logic that, I want to get into medical school, and that if I work hard, if I set the intention, I work hard and make dua, I may not get into medical school. It feels so, especially if you've been an Australia student before that attempt. And there's many people we know in our circles who probably did do their part and still didn't make it. And so the outcome is not in our hands. It's never in our hands. But 100% of the effort is. And when the outcome goes our way, we're taught to make shukr, to be thankful to Allah. And if it doesn't, to have sabr, to be patient, but to go back to the drawing board and to persevere on that same path until Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guides us to something that is better. Because what we're pursuing may not be what was meant for us. And this is another aspect of spiritual intelligence. And specifically in terms of leadership, Nabil al-Azami, rahimahullah, it's a brother who wrote a profound book, Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu 11 Leadership Qualities That Change the World. And he wrote a chapter on spiritual intelligence, and he described these, what is summarized in these 4 pillars here. That spiritual intelligence really helps us to make meaning of our investments in this life in a way that they translate to the akhirah. Our iman then becomes our moral compass as opposed to the external pressures from, the medical legal environment. And that we transcend serving people in a way that feeds our ego, that I can save this life because of me, but rather we serve them. We work in healthcare because we're serving humanity in a way that's hopefully pleasing to Allah. And that it's not about our ego, it's not about us. And that we have this never-ending source of compassion to always tap into. In the middle of a busy shift, maybe I lose a patient. And every life is precious. And the life we're taking care of, where we've been actively engaged with, it leaves a mark on us. And we're distraught sometimes when we lose patients. But with the compassion and leaning and tapping into the compassion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who is Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, we lean onto Him. We lean onto the resources around us, colleagues, have a debrief session. We can be intentional about tapping into that and renewing ourselves so that we can keep going with the work and aligning the work that we do with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's will so that we attract barakah and we're acting more from this place of spiritual intelligence. And in terms of leadership, it creates a perspective of empathy that truly helps us to lead with grace, balancing holding people accountable and being fair with them and just at the same time. Because we know that without Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy, we won't be in our position, and that position that we're in as leaders, and it doesn't have to be an official leader, right? Just to be clear, it doesn't have to be a title. If you're talking to patients and their families, you're leading them, or nurses, or a team in healthcare, you're leading them. So this is all part of that idea of being spiritually intelligent. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds us in this ayah that is often quoted, من أجل ذلك كتب على على بني إسرائيل أنه من قتل نفسا بغير نفس أو فساد في الأرض فكأنما قتل الناس جميعا. Whoever kills a soul, it is as though they have killed all of mankind. And whoever saves one soul, it is as though they have saved all of humanity. So the work in healthcare has profound ramifications. The healthcare professionals, those who are clinicians, you're not just collecting RVUs, you're not just commodity, you're not just a staff member. You're people who are holding the dignity of the soul, the integrity of the soul, and the integrity of humanity. So it carries a lot of weight, and we shouldn't diminish that. And recognizing that, appreciating this unique place that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put all of us, um, should create that resonance between seeking alignment with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's will and not losing out on our portion of the dunya. And let's look at the legacy of Ibrahim alayhi salam. It's truly an incredible legacy in surrender and in sacred service. So there's one example in the Quran that truly highlights, the idea of submission, of sincerity, and of sacrifice. It's hard to find a more compelling one than the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam. In these days of Hajj, there's a gravitation towards slaughtering animals, as commemoration of his tradition. But we need to slow down to what that truly meant. From when he left his family, his wife Hajar, behind in the desert, and she played her role, she let him go, but he left because in that moment he had a choice. I choose Allah or I choose my desire. But he chose Allah, he left her. And then she also played her part of trying to fend for herself and for the child, running between the Mount Safa and Marwa, because she was also aligned and choosing Allah over their desires. And that can only be done with sincerity, right? Meaning that ultimately that ikhlas, that sincerity is about earning Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's pleasure. And that comes with sacrifice of leaving family behind to show up at work, the sacrifice of working long hours to take care of people who are usually strangers. But there's another type of sacrifice that we also need to think about, especially when we're thinking about slaughtering an animal in these next 10 days on the day of Yawm al-Nahar, the day of sacrifice. Because the core essence of the sacrifice is truly to go home with lessons that transform us. So when Allah commanded Ibrahim alayhi salam to get his son Ismail alayhi salam and to slaughter his son, Allah was asking him to choose between two things. To choose between his desires, and I don't wish that on anybody, that we be in that situation. To choose between your son, slaughtering your son, which is choosing Allah, and then not slaughtering your son, which will be fulfilling our desires. Obviously, We know the end of the story. But the question is, we all have an Ismail in our lives, something that we need to slaughter, something that we need to remove, something that we need to grow past. For some of us, it's our ego. It gets in the way. It gets in the way of, making sacrifices that align with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's will. You know, sometimes it's the pursuit of dunya, it's the pursuit of money. And maybe my Ismail. Sometimes it's the pursuit of, fame. I write all these papers, you know, I can sacrifice all of my salah while doing all of that. We all have an Ismail. Question is, what are we going to do about it? And as we think about slaughtering an animal and finding the best deeds in this best 10 days of the year, what we need to all slow down to identify our own Ismail, the thing that we need to grow past. Because otherwise, we're going to be stuck in a place of comfort. And as the famous saying goes, if you're not growing, then you're dying. But more than that, it's this idea of ubudiyah, which is the core essence of what Ibrahim alayhi salam represents, being an abd of Allah, a slave of Allah, a servant of Allah. When a servant of Allah shows up in the healthcare space, they should be showing up very differently than somebody who is not. There's somebody who is showing up because of their ego. Somebody who is showing up because, the title and what that means for them. Somebody who is in pursuit of money and, doing fraudulent billing. In Surah Al-Tawfifina talks about those who give a service and they either overcharge for it or they don't fulfill the haqq of that service. May Allah protect us. Or it's the fame at the expense of truly investing in our akhirah. And so the example of Ibrahim alayhi salam gives us a lot to think about. So what is my Ismail? What is the thing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is challenging us to grow past? As we lead up into these best 10 days of the year, so that we can get there with intentionality, make the du'as that we need to make the commitments, set the intentions that we need to make the commitments that we need to make to be able to grow past those things. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give all of us tawfiq to recognize these things and to truly make a commitment to shifting our perspective around them. And it's interesting, we're talking about spiritual intelligence, and in this ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala references وَمَنْ يَرْغَبْ عَنْ مِلَّةِ إِبْرَاهِيمَ إِلَّا مَنْ سَفِهَ نَفْسَهُ. That who would be averse to the religion of Ibrahim except the one who is not intelligent. There's a lot of smart people in the room. There's a lot of smart people in healthcare. But what will differentiate us in terms of true success is that we truly invest in our akhirah. And that's what true intelligence is. This is the intelligence that is aligned with the intelligence of Ibrahim alayhi who was described as the friend of Allah in the Quran. When the Rasul somebody told him that you're the best of creation, the Rasul responded that no, Ibrahim is. Of course, that's debatable, but the point is, he's one of the best of Allah's creation. And so as we live our lives, we have to do our work to grow intentionally, to find a support system, whether it's an accountability partner, a program, a course, a mentor, a coach, our local shuyukh, even a friend. that will support us on this journey of growth and of transformation. And in terms of our work, I'll just give you a simple framework to think about, and maybe we can make an acronym out of this. We've already talked about it. Three things to consider is that our work in healthcare is an amana to trust. The lives that we're supporting, people we're taking care of, we have to truly see it that way. And that we will do our best with them. We're not perfection, because perfection is often ego serving, but that we will truly do our best. We'll go out of our way when we have to. We will serve with excellence, and that will aspire towards sincerity, ikhlas, in our service. And that our ultimate audience is the acceptance of these deeds from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because then that elevates our work from uh, just work to something that's worship, and that will weigh heavy on our scale of good deeds. As we enter these best 10 days of the year, many of us will probably be working, except, some of our brothers, our colleagues, sisters who are going for Hajj. The vast majority of people don't take that much time off. They may take time off for Eid. Most of us will be working. And so we have a real opportunity, in these best 10 days to truly hone in on these ideas and rethink how we show up at work, what meaning we make out of it, that we transcend above our ego, that we seek to please Allah through the work, and that our ultimate audience is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's acceptance of the work that we're doing, so that it's something that weighs heavy on our scale of good deeds. And I just saw the C on the sincerity, but it should be an S. All right. Any questions? Any thoughts so far? Let's drop it in the chat box. Some of the challenges that we have in healthcare, when you think about spiritual intelligence, it's important to work through these reframes. Sometimes when things are not going well, we blame the system. But a spiritual reframe is, what is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala trying to show me here? Because it's a test of our sincerity. Am I going to still try my best to do the work despite the systemic challenges? And that doesn't mean that we accept the challenge, but that we don't miss the spiritual insight in the challenge. Because then we're able to align our work with our intentions, with our approach. And then sometimes the waswas of shaitan comes and we blame ourselves. But when we recognize that the outcome is not in our hands and that we're servants of Allah, we're just doing our best, then we move away from this self-blame. It doesn't mean that we don't go back to the drawing board and look at what went wrong, as we saw in the spiritual intelligence equation, but that in that moment, again, that we don't forget our place as Abd of Allah. We're just trying to do our best, and that the outcome is not in our hands. So it's not a blame or, blame game. Because, first of all, healthcare work, clinical work is not a perfect science. And it's not about perfectionism, which is ego serving. But it's, for us as Muslims, it's about doing our best. And that sometimes you encounter a patient and you just resent them because of, maybe how they've talked to you. And how do we find it in ourselves to get past that? It's to reframe who we're serving. It's another soul, to renew our intentions, and to restore compassion while still holding them accountable. For example, if the patient is lashing out that they don't want to be seen by a Black physician, of course, that's not acceptable. So we appropriately address it with the system. And if the system is able to navigate it, and then we'll show up and we'll still do it with that, work with it. And thinking about the hierarchy of intentions, which we've talked about a few times on our webinar, is just to reinforce some of the things we've said before. At the first three levels at the bottom of the pyramid, it's really very dunya focused, very much focused on the financial worldly gains, the honor, reputation, uh, something that makes us feel good. At the higher levels, we start to experience some spiritual contentment from the service that we're giving, and that hopefully our service is something that can get us to Jannah. But at the highest level is that we're truly doing this for the sake of Allah's pleasure. And as the famous narration goes, that one of the great scholars of our deen uh, was asked if he had to choose between praying to Rakas and going to Jannah, what would he choose? And of course, when we present it like this, you recognize that he's going to choose to pray to Rakas because a humble slave, a humble servant knows what is pleasing to their Lord rather than to choose what is serving their own desires. And as we're coming towards the end, a few blind spots that I just want us to pay attention to is the blind spot of performance over purpose. It's already obvious that our purpose should be what's driving how we show up, so that our alignment is clear, that we're doing this to earn Allah's pleasure, and that we want to stay away from being lone wolves, doing this in isolation, because without support systems in a very high pressure setting, it's very hard to thrive and to build resilience. But when we have enough support around us and investing in self-care, then we're more resilient. And then the struggle of compartmentalizing our faith. It's okay to show up authentically at work as yourself. You don't have to rub it in people's faces. But we all have to be mindful of letting go of our core values to score, a cheap gain that's only serving us in this dunya. And at the end of the day, our risk is already written. And sometimes we forget that. All right. So here are some tools that are just a simple way for us to think about how we take care of ourselves and how we make choices. So at Sakina MD, we talk about this idea of baraka leaks. And for healthcare professionals, we've nailed it down to these four main areas where we tend to leak baraka. We have the energy leaks. We're often sleep deprived. We don't invest time in movement. We just don't, we're never really at our full energy levels to be able to operate our best selves because of that. And that robs us of the barakah of doing our work with Insan, of being present with family and our close relationships, of being able to do our ibadat at the best level, as opposed to the mood dependent worship that we described earlier. And then you have the boundary leaks. This one is obvious because work just grows into everywhere. We have pajama time where we're taking charts home. It just doesn't stop. And what that means is other things suffer. And then we have the identity leak, where it's just saying yes, like one of the archetypes that we described earlier, uh, the overextended achiever. Their identity is shifted from a faith-first identity to a healthcare-centric identity, and there is no balance. And so they're saying yes, people-pleasing, and then very ego-serving. And then there's the waswasa of shaitan, and negative self-talk, which often comes when we're trying to make major change. These whispers tell us, no, don't do this. You can just stay where you are. You're doing so well. Look at all your accolades. But the reality is, it's all deception. And if we truly want to grow, we have to identify What area am I leaking the most? And just slow down to that. And when we slow down to that, we can do something about it. And here are some examples. If you're leaking energy, maybe from lack of sleep, if you need a sleep coach or a sleep trainer, personal trainer, or an app that will help you, do something about it. You can do something about it. The boundary leaks. My program director back in residency used to always remind us that we didn't have to take work home. We could be more efficient at work. We could find ways, mentors who can help us think through our day and help us navigate it. And then we didn't have to say yes to everything. But in our areas of strength where our contribution will be most meaningful, of course, say yes, but say yes in a way that doesn't compromise who you are and the things that are important to you. And then there's the identity leak. If that is your area, think about simple, small, consistent steps that you can take that reinforce your faith first identity. For me, one of the biggest things I was able to do in residency was in my third year residency, uh, my program director had me scheduled for a clinic through the time of Jummah. But I had visibility to it during the annual, resident check-in with the program director, I think at the end of my first year. So we had a conversation and he said, that's fine, I'll block that hour for you. For some of us, we may not be at, that may not be our struggle. But we may have one struggle where, we need to even just take space to make Salat al-Dhuhr, which often comes in the middle of a workday. And we're struggling with that. Oftentimes, it's a conversation and it's a 5-minute break. Whatever it is, we can certainly do something about it. And then there's the whispers of shaitan, right? But this one, and then the negative self-talk, it requires being intentional about our own self-worth, how we view ourselves, and then the adhkar that support that. Getting very mindful about leveraging those adhkar that the Rasul has taught us. And sometimes self-worth whispers, identity work requires a coaching container. It requires help from a mentor, a coach, somebody who we can trust to really help you name this and give you the permission to work through it and the support that you need. But don't sit there, because without addressing these things, we can't experience any true growth. And these things will get in the way of truly finding alignment between our work lives and our lives outside of work in a way that we don't lose ourselves in our work and that we invest meaningfully in our akhirah. And here are a couple of anchors that you can choose in these 4 gardens that we always talk about in Sakina. For the faith garden, choose one spiritual anchor for yourself if you don't already have those. If you have some, we can always build on them, as we should from year to year. We should be growing towards Allah. And then they have the family or the relationship anchors. One thing we all struggle with, obviously, is devices. Finding that device for you dinner time a number of times a week, Saturday morning, maybe a run for some, or a walk, whatever it is, something that you can, make sure that it's a true anchor. And then an energy or self-care anchor is maybe around sleep for some. And then for others, it's an anchor around work. No chats after a certain time, blocking those spaces. And then that would challenge you to find other creative ways of managing the time and the space that you have, in the space that you've committed to work on those things. And a boundary that truly changes everything is that one boundary that you commit to, whether it's from charting, whether it's around transitions, whether it's around worship, whether it's around recovery. These boundaries are important. And as we kind of get towards the last segment of today's conversation, one thing I want to share with you guys is this idea of transformation. Coaching container allows you the opportunity to think clearly, to be reflective. So he's trying to join. Give me 1 second here. Okay. Still trying here. There we go. All right. So we're going to wrap up in about 15 minutes, inshallah, 10 to 15 minutes. So coaching as prophetic transformation. The coaching container is a space that allows for reflective thinking and enables you to truly find clarity in your purpose. It's a space for honest self-awareness. It's one of the most powerful places that I've found to be able to develop a stronger sense of self-awareness in my own journey with my coach. It helps me to also recognize, places where I need to course correct, and then make tawbah. And then gives me the support and the accountability to be able to sustainably, keep to my own commitments. And of course, ultimately, that translates into being able to show up with Sam, being able to be constant in my showing up, consistent in my delivery, and in my service to family, to my deen, to my own self-care, and of course, at work. And as we think through coaching, I'll just wrap up the rest of the presentation with asking you guys for permission to talk about this program that we offer at Sakina Growth Company. It's called the Elevate with Baraka program, the Resilient Healthcare Worker program. Just want to check in with everyone here, if that's okay. We can spend a few minutes talking about that. And if some of you have to go, you're welcome to drop off, inshallah. Okay. Thumbs up, thumbs down. Are you guys able to stay for another 12 minutes? Just comment in the chat box. Okay, thumbs up. Yeah, there are a couple of thumbs up there. All right, bismillah. Jazakallah khair. Yeah, sometimes going over an hour, just want to make sure you guys are okay with that. All right, so the Elevate with Baraka program is a group coaching program that we've designed specifically for healthcare workers. And what we do is we help healthcare workers who are struggling with work-life balance to find a sense of balance, a sense of resilience, so that they're able to thrive at work and in life without losing their akhirah. And the identity that comes out of that is the identity of a spiritual intelligent healthcare worker who is finding means and ways to navigate the challenges of healthcare work life. And the program at a glance, we do 2 coaching sessions a month. with 2 implementation labs, and you're supported by a community with accountability systems. And then we do an expanded curriculum of the Barak Effort book that Muhammad Faris wrote um, to support that journey. And here's the framework. It's the Elevate framework. So we have 3 phases of the program, and you can join us, at the Barak activation phase and stop there, or you can do a deepening phase with us and go deeper. The Barak activation phase, we focus on the foundations of Barakah activation, and then in the deepening phase, we truly focus on the 4 gardens that we've kind of alluded to. The garden of Deen, the garden of work, the garden of health and energy, and then the garden of our relationships. And for those of you who registered, some of the challenges that were highlighted was around like time management, because it can be hectic, especially if maybe you're a single parent, or you know you and your wife are in healthcare like myself, or you're just balancing multiple different things in your current season of life. It's tailored to each individual's main area of challenge where they need work. And then each individual can also work through the other areas depending on their need. And then in the Baraka Mastery phase, we truly focus on thriving in your identity, through consolidation of those habits, routines, and then developing autonomy through self-coaching. So that's our framework. And as I've alluded to earlier, mainly through coaching and implementation labs is how we support you. And then we also have some personalized sessions, one-on-one coaching. And of course, there is always an investment. For those who need this type of support, because it's very hands-on, we offer, very tailored support. We have the 3-month pathway and then the 12-month pathway. In the 3-month pathway, the investment is $997 a month. And then, for those who pay in full, there's a lot, a bit more discounted, 12,850. And then for the 12-month package, it's at a much better rate at 875 per month. And then in the bonus, for those of you who are here, and in this best 10 days of the year, we're going to be offering that same package for much lower at 9,000. And there are only 10 seats available in each path. Now, in these best 10 days of the year, which is the time that I invite all of you to truly invest in yourselves, the first 3 slots are going to be at a very discounted rate at $9,000. And then the second 3 slots at $9,500. And then the last 4 slots at $9,900. What I want you guys to also keep in mind is that if you're truly committed to this thing of investment and you think that this program is something that will be meaningful for you, I want you to reach out regardless of what you think of these numbers, because these are just numbers at the end of the day. Money is just a means. And so I don't want you guys to get stuck on those numbers, because as we've done, in different cohorts, in a different group, we always find a way to make it work, inshallah. Here's what some of our, people who have participated in our program have shared in the past. And I'll just leave that for a couple of minutes for you guys to read through. And we will send these out as well. So if you didn't get a chance to read through every line, and then on our program page, our landing page, also we have a couple more testimonials over there. And this is Dr. Mustafa, who took our program in the very early stages and an early supporter.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Mustafa Yusuf. I attended Dr. Sulaiman time management workshop as part of the VRIC Leadership Academy. I definitely learned a lot from his workshop, and I highly recommend him. Dr. Sulaiman have deep knowledge, and he's very passionate about the topics of time management and peak performance in the Baraka culture. May Allah reward him, and I strongly recommend him for our community leaders and entrepreneurs, and we'll continue to learn from him. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
All right. So who is this program for? It's for anybody who is truly seeking deep alignment and who is committed to sustainable transformation. And you want to have that faith-first identity, because we're always experiencing that tension between our healthcare identity and our spiritual identity. For us to truly invest, in the akhirah, where we're not having to choose between work and then our spirituality, alignment is key. And the Rasul some example makes it crystal clear that alignment is not impossible, but it is doable. And we have role models, even in our time, who are living by this standard. We will never achieve the level of Rasul, but we always have to aspire towards it as our North Star. It's not for you if you're looking for a quick fix. There's no quick fix. Transformation takes time, it takes work, it takes sincerity. And so, there's many different programs out there, but this one is just not one of those ones that is quick. And there's two paths forward. If you're interested at all, I want you to scan the QR code and apply today. What that application means is not a financial commitment. It's basically a survey that helps you to think through where you are today, and then gives us an opportunity to set up a call where we will answer any questions that you have. But more importantly, you get 2 free coaching calls with myself. That's what you get with the application. But I do want to encourage you, if you're interested, to go ahead and scan that. Now, if you just want to hear about our programs in the future, you can scan the QR code on the right side on your screen and just join the wait list, and we'll be more than happy to give you priority access for future programs. And I'll just pause here if there's any questions, any thoughts. All right. And if there are no questions, feel free to follow our work. Our website is sakinamd.com. You can find us on LinkedIn, especially on my personal page. And feel free to reach out if you have any questions, any thoughts. We'll be happy to support you. And we'll send out the post webinar email and then resources, inshallah. Any other questions, thoughts before we close, inshallah? Is this beneficial? Feedback? Okay, alhamdulillah. Jazakallah khair for joining, guys. I really appreciate you spending time with us and look forward to supporting you in the near future. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala assist all of us to have the most transformational best 10 days of the year. Don't forget to make lots of dua on Yawm al-Arafah, the day of Arafah, the day of dua. The best dua is the dua of Arafah. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give all of us tawfiq to be able to invest in our akhirah, in our eternal future. And we'll see you guys next time, inshallah. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.